Today I want to talk about which MacBook is my favorite ever made and why that might not be the case for very much longer. So, get subscribed, leave a like down below, and let's get into it. Okay, let's not beat around the bush here. My favorite MacBook of all time is the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I think this thing is absolutely the bee's knees. Pretty much everything it does incredibly well. Now, specifically when I talk about the 14-inch MacBook Pro, I don't necessarily mean any given version of it. I actually think that the less expensive M1 Pro equipped 14-inch MacBook Pros are the ones to go for. Now, you can get this thing with up to the 32-core M1 Max, which has a ton of power and a ton of MSRP numbers. Over 3,000 of them, as a matter of fact. And at that point, if you need it, it's there, great, but the M1 Pro is the best all-rounder. This one that I have is the $2499 model, which has the 10-core CPU, the 16-core GPU, 1TB SSD, and 16 gigabytes of RAM. And to be honest, I think that is the best configuration. A terabyte, perfect. 16 cores, perfect. And there are actually a number of reasons why I prefer the 14-inch to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. The biggest one is portability. I mean, this thing is not a super thin laptop, but when you blow it up to 16 inches, it's big. As someone who's fortunate enough to have both a fully loaded 32-core 16-inch and a mid-range 14-inch, you would think that I would choose the nearly $4,000 laptop most of the time. But no, I usually carry the 14-inch with me. So the way I see it, there are only two problems with the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Number one is battery life. Because you're getting the same exact internals as the 16-inch in a smaller footprint, you're gonna have less battery. It just makes sense. And so in the real world, what you're looking at is the M1 MacBook Air is going to get better battery life than this device for the most part. And it actually makes a difference depending on what spec you go for. So the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro has the best battery life, and as you move up, especially to the M1 Max, you're going to have a noticeable impact on battery life, especially when you're putting the system under load. If you want to see more about what that actually means in the real world, check out my 14-inch MacBook Pro review, which will be popping up on screen right now. Now, the other problem with the 14-inch MacBook Pro is the cooling system, but it's actually nothing to do with the physical cooling system and everything to do with the way Apple handles it. Let me explain. Right now, I'm running Cinebench R23 on my 14-inch MacBook Pro, and as you can probably hear, or not hear, the fans are extremely quiet, barely more than a whisper. And the entire chassis of this thing is cool to the touch. Everything seems to be going great. But because I'm running TG Pro, I can tell that the CPU cores, especially the performance cores, are currently running at 90 to 95 degrees Celsius. And that's not great. That's the type of temperatures that we used to see under Intel. But if we look at the fan speed, both the left and the right side are spinning at half of their total RPM. So what the heck is going on here? Apple is allowing the CPU to get hot even though it doesn't need to. And if I go ahead and adjust from the system setting to max fan speeds, you can hear we're really picking up now, but almost immediately our temperatures dropped out of the 90s. Literally in seconds. It's crazy how fast this happens. So I'm gonna give it 30 seconds and then we're gonna see what the temperatures are at. Okay, so right now with 2 minutes left in the test, the performance cores are at 82 to 85 degrees Celsius. That is about 10 degrees Celsius lower than they were before. This is a very capable machine, and the cooling system is more than able to cool even the 32-core M1 Max. But the problem is, Apple doesn't want your machine to sound like this. This sounds like an Intel Mac. They want it to be cool and quiet. So they prioritize low fan RPMs, low surface temperatures, but very high CPU core temps. So despite the minor issue of battery life and the way Apple handles the cooling system, this is my favorite MacBook of all time right now. It just does everything the best. But that might not be the case for very long, which is what this video is really about. Apple is cooking up some laptops, which could actually be, in my opinion, a much better all-round decision than this. Now, the first and most immediate one that I am absolutely stoked for is the new MacBook Air. I think the new MacBook Air presents a really interesting proposition because when you look at it compared to a 14-inch MacBook Pro, it's very similar. You are getting a slightly smaller display, 13.6 inches instead of 14.1. That is literally just half an inch different. And you're compromising on a couple of other things, like the performance. You're getting an M2 chip instead of an M1 Pro. You're getting a non-mini LED, non-ProMotion display. But, and this is the big but, when you look at the rest of that device, you're getting a very similar design, but it's even thinner. It's remarkably thin, 11.6 millimeters. That's the same thickness as the original iPhone. You're getting a device that is extremely portable. You're getting a device with no fan, so no fan noise under any situation. And you're getting pretty much the same battery life for $800 less. Or in the case of this mid-range version, it's like $1,300 less. Less than half the price. And that is really interesting because we've started to see some leaked performance benchmarks for the M2 chip. And to be honest, guys, you're not getting half the performance, even though it's half the price. The M2 chip looks like it's gonna be really interesting. Of course, I'm gonna be reviewing it in depth next week when the new M2 MacBook Pro comes out, so get subscribed if you wanna see that coverage. But if the M2 chip is as powerful as it seems, and especially now that it has the media encode engines. Now, in typical Apple fashion, the new M2 MacBook Air doesn't mean the 14-inch MacBook Pro is bad. It doesn't make it pointless, but it does make you wonder if you need to spend this much to get this kind of an experience. And then, just as I'm getting ready to get super pumped about this absolute killer MacBook Air, Ming-Chi Kuo comes out here and says, hey, remember those rumors about the 15-inch MacBook Air? Well, it's not gonna be an Air. It'll just be called a MacBook 15-inch with the M2 and the M2 Pro chips on offer. And all of a sudden, I'm doubting everything I've ever believed because I've made multiple videos begging, groveling even, for Apple to make an affordably priced, mid-range, 15-inch thin and light laptop. That is my idea of the perfect MacBook. Now, according to Ming-Chi Kuo, we're not exactly gonna see this super duper soon. He's saying the new 15-inch would go into mass production in midway through 2023. Having an M2 version with a 35-watt adapter and an M2 Pro with a 67-watt adapter would mean that this sort of falls in between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. Right now, when you look at Apple's lineup, you've got the M2 MacBook Air at $1199 and $1499. You've got the irrelevant M2 MacBook Pro at $1299, and then you got a big old gap. The 14-inch doesn't come in until $2,000. So that leaves a lot of room for a 15-inch M2 MacBook at like $1599. I honestly think that the 15-inch MacBook Pro from 2016 to 2019 had a really good form factor. I made a whole video talking about this, where even though that thing sucked, the cooling was bad, the design was bad, the butterfly keyboard was bad, the touch bar was bad, it was all pretty terrible. But the one thing that they really nailed with that was a 15-inch portable device. And so if Apple could resurrect that idea with Apple Silicon, I think they would have an absolute killer product. And when you're talking about a 15-inch device with an M2 chip, it could probably be fanless as well. Like a fanless 15-inch, more than powerful enough device that's thin as or maybe slightly thicker than the MacBook Air right now, which is 11.6 millimeters. That would be an absolutely fantastic device. And that's pretty much everything that I have ever wanted from a MacBook. So to wrap things up and circle back around to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, none of this has any impact on how good the 14-inch MacBook Pro is. It's still a fantastic, powerful device in a small portable enclosure that's absolutely gorgeous with tiny bezels, ProMotion, mini LED, all of that great stuff. But the 13-inch MacBook Air, I think, is going to take the cake as the best all-round MacBook because of its feature set and price. And as for that 15-inch MacBook, if that does come to fruition in about a year, I think that is probably my idea of the perfect MacBook. Let me know if you agree in the comments below, but I can't wait for that. However, all that being said, don't let any of this stop you from getting a 14-inch MacBook Pro. As I mentioned, it has an absolutely phenomenal combination of features. But really what the whole video boils down to is, holy crap, Apple Silicon is great and I can't wait for more of it. And if you can't wait either, make sure to get subscribed, leave a like down below, and turn on notifications because I'm gonna have M2 coverage coming at you guys starting from next Friday. So make sure to get subscribed, stay tuned for all of that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.